I was just saying that I made this compilation that you're listening to right now, about 1 hour of amazing Falcom RPG music. You can find it on my main channel anytime you want. It's public. It'll be public forever, as long as it doesn't get demonetized or copyright fucked in the ass. Will there be more physical media pickups, or we are definitely heading to the digital era? Indeed we are. Physical media, we've talked about this topic many times before. I don't think physical media will disappear anytime soon. It will kind of disappear at some point. We will get to a point where Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation will no longer have physical media for their next consoles. Maybe the PlayStation 7. I get the feeling the PlayStation 6 will still release physical media, so will the next Xbox, or maybe not. Nintendo definitely. But yeah, we are heading into the digital era, but that's gonna be in like probably 10 years, you know. I give it 10 years at least, so we can see that big jump, you know, no more physical media. But then companies like Limited Run Games, Super Rare Games, and those companies, you know, I think they will still prevail and still focus on printing physical copies of games that are no longer getting released, physical releases. Well, now that I opened the Pandora's box about Limited Run Games and those companies, someone's asking, do I collect games by them? No, I do not. I was just thinking last night about that, you know? I was thinking about that. I was having a conversation with somebody last night about that, about those companies. And I was like, well, I think there's two sides of a coin. There's some good and bad things about those companies. I don't think those companies started doing what they do nowadays and what they did back then when they started with ill intentions. Obviously not. Their whole intent was to precisely to create a physical copy of a video game that it just seemed that wasn't gonna get any, right? And they needed to make sure they needed to like make sure that nobody else will print a copy of that game, so they could have the rights to it and print it. So, but they by doing this with a good intent, you know, they ended up creating a gold mine for scalpers. Like I said, it wasn't their intention. I don't think Limited Run Games, when they started, they thought about that, you know, oh my god, eventually my copies, all of these copies from my game are gonna sold out, and then scalpers are gonna pick them up and they're gonna resell them for insane prices. Or maybe they did, but they didn't think too much of that, because all they were printing back then, I think this is a company that started like 5-6 years ago, right? I think around 2018, maybe 17, around that time. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course, you know, I don't know the full history of these companies. But Limited Run Games, I think it was one of the first ones, if not the first one. So I think the impact they made on the collecting industry was huge, because a lot of people slowly started buying their games and being thankful and grateful to them for printing copies of games that were 100% sure not getting a physical release, like never. You know, I own a copy, it's Cosmic Star Heroine. It's by Limited Run Games, and I got it. And I think that's the only, I think I may own like 1 or 2 games from those companies, really. So to answer your questions, I do not collect games from these companies because they're usually very expensive, and I live in Mexico. So my other problem is that these companies sell games, but they have a big problem with shipping services. And not a big problem in their country of origin, of course, but international shipping is always very expensive when it comes to these companies. It's not like in Amazon, where there are services that you can have for free. You have a lot of free shipping online. You have a lot of dirt cheap free international shipping in some websites. Not by these websites, not by these companies, you know. I try to buy something from Limited Run Games, is $40 plus fucking 20 of shipping plus fucking 10 of taxes. So I end up paying $70 for a $40 game. So obviously I do not collect anything from these companies. And if I see their games on retro stores or gaming stores, places like that, you know, they're usually expensive because fucking scalpers, right? Or resellers, you know, what's a reseller going to do? Most resellers aren't scalpers, thankfully. So what do? They buy their games, or they get them used by some random dude that walked into the store and sold them a bunch of copies. And some of these resellers have to maintain a reasonable price, but others just don't. And it's only natural because these companies print so very few copies. That's why some of these names are limited run games, limited print runs, right? So eventually they become rare and expensive, and everybody wants to sell them in exchange for a fucking kidney, man. So to conclude this little topic, this question, I respect the original intent these companies had when printing copies of games that weren't gonna get any. I'm also kind of grateful for that, but at the same time, I don't give a shit about that anymore because all they did was create this huge scalping market, and they fucking ruined it. It's not, like I said, they didn't do that on purpose, but that's what they did. So maybe they should find a way to print more copies or to make some kind of deeper analysis of the market and come up with a solution, because it's a problem, right? All of these copies, and usually some of the rarest games nowadays on modern consoles are from these companies. Anyway, have you ever played or known a series called Clock Tower? Yes, I have. I played the original PS1 games, and well, I've played the whole trilogy. The first two games were kind of hard to get into. I found them really outdated, even though they were released in the late 90s, early 2000s. They just felt like straight ports out of computer games that were like from the early 90s, in my opinion, mid 90s. And I couldn't get into them. The ideas were interesting, but I'm just not really a fan of point and click. The first one was a bit of a point and click game and a survival horror. It was a great attempt to create that mix of genres, but I just didn't find it appealing. And the second game was a little bit more different. Now you have like more control over your character, but it was very cryptic. I didn't know what to do or where to go, and I got lost pretty easily. The third game on the PlayStation 2 felt more like a true survival horror game, like an actual survival horror game, resembling the Resident Evil games or Silent Hill, Dino Crisis. And I liked it a little bit more, but I never finished it for some reason. I don't even remember why. I still have a physical copy of it. I mean, it's pirated, but I think I do somewhere. Maybe I'll go back to it one day. But as you probably already know, I became a huge die-hard fan of Haunting Ground. And I do own a physical copy of it. And that became pretty much my favorite survival horror game of all time. And it still is, up there with Little Nightmares. So I'm a big fan of Haunting Ground, but Clock Tower, not really the biggest fan out there. How do you feel about Final Fantasy Shin Megami Tensei crossover? Those two series come from two extremely politicized companies, so I'm not interested, to be honest. It's probably gonna be another Tokyo Mirage Sessions bullshit, or something like that. So I'm not interested, man. Have you played Rule of Rose? Yes, I did a long time ago. I actually played that game without knowing anything about it. I just found a copy of it, pirated copy, bootleg copy of it, in a flea market once, and I brought it home. And I didn't know it was rare and expensive or controversial, or I didn't know anything. It was a completely blind buy, and I bought it because it looked like a survival horror game, and it was. And I remember playing it, and God, man, I couldn't get into it. I really wanted to like that game because I was big into games like Haunting Ground, Clock Tower, survival horror games, Resident Evil, Silent Hill. I was a big fan of the genre back then, and I just found the game to be kind of boring, getting lost in a mansion full of orphans, and that played tricks on you. And it's more like, I guess it's also one of those games that very, very slowly starts getting more interesting and more horrific, I guess. But I think I remember putting like 2-3 hours into it and just didn't get anywhere. I solved some puzzles and got lost, and I got the dog, and I could fight, but the controls were pretty, I don't want to say terrible, they were just kind of mediocre. Felt unresponsive sometimes, sluggish sometimes, and at first I thought it's done on purpose because it's a survival horror game. So the more useless you feel as the player with the controls, you know, the more intense the game becomes, because you feel that hopeless desperation of trying to control your character perfectly as you try to run away from some enemy or from some monsters, or as you try to kill them, right? But you know what? As I kept playing, I came to the realization that it wasn't the case, that the controls were just not that great, and eventually I just ditched the game. And it was after that when I found out about everything about that game, that it was so freaking expensive and rare, that it was controversial because of the orphans, the little kids and whatnot. And I remember a lot of people were praising the game, saying, oh, this game is expensive, yes, but it's awesome. And I'm like, man, no, this is one of the most overrated games I've played in my life. It's not great, guys. It's not a bad game at all. It's actually good, and I think if you stick to it and you have a little patience, you can kind of grow to like it, right? But I just didn't have the patience back then, and I ditched it, and I moved on, and I never went back to it. I think it's a very overrated game, and its popularity comes mainly for being so freaking expensive. Black Rose Valkyrie in PS4. How about that game? You mean Dark Rose Valkyrie? It's not a good game. It's not a bad game either, but it's not good either. It's just full of problems. God, I've seen so many JRPGs with great ideas, trying to be original and trying to be creative. Compile Heart, the company who developed that game, you know, often tries to do that. They try to be as innovative as they can to stay alive on the market, because they are still a very obscure company. A lot of people don't pay attention to their games, especially because of the sexualization. Not that fan service is a bad thing, but it's more like a lot of people don't take the game seriously because of the fan service. And that's a game with that's basically a harem. You play as this guy, and then you date girls and bond with them and pick your waifu and whatnot. So it's one of those, right? But it's a game where that the difficulty spikes and the exploration ruined it. You get to a point quite early in the game, not even 5 hours into it, and you're like, man, I'm lost, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do. And to get back to town, it's a pain in the ass. To get back to your base, it's a pain in the ass. And then, yeah, you kind of need to walk through to traverse the freaking dungeons or areas because they're too long, full of enemies, no random encounters. And it became a pretty much boring, repetitive, tedious grind fest. And even if you, I don't remember if the game has any difficulty settings, if you can play it on easy. Even if you play it on easy, the exploration still kind of kills it. So yeah, it's just one of those games, man. I don't think it's great, but it's not bad. It's just there. I think it's one of the worst compiled hard JRPGs ever made. Do you consider your channel one of the biggest JRPG channels in YouTube in terms of subscribers? I have no idea. A few years ago, I stopped paying attention to other JRPG channels and what they do and how many views they get or subscribers. I stopped caring about that, stopped paying attention, so I have no idea if I'm big or small. I have no clue, man. I don't feel big, especially not nowadays, since I'm pretty much blacklisted on the website. And what I do know is this channel, my YouTube channel, became influential. And yeah, sure, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. You know, it's one of the first JRPG channels, one of the first YouTube channels that started focusing 100% on Japanese role-playing games. And I think I made top 10 JRPGs into a trend, probably, because right after I started was making top 10s on JRPGs, which was back in 2014. I remember almost nobody was doing them, and there were only like a couple of videos from channels that weren't dedicated to creating JRPG top 10s, right? So I came along, and some of my videos succeeded, and most of my channel focus back then was merely top 10 JRPG top 10s. And I noticed that between 2018, 2019, other YouTubers started following, and then it became a trend, and nowadays everybody and their mom are doing them. But yeah, one of the biggest JRPG channels, I have no clue, man. Tips for Valkyria Chronicles. Okay, so wow, I'm not gonna lie to you, man. The first Valkyria Chronicles game, that was my very first time playing a video game like that. I mean, it's such a unique experience that the only other game that I can think of that's similar to it is XCOM, the XCOM series, but I didn't get into the XCOM series until later. So Valkyria Chronicles was my first strategy RPG of that kind, and I got so lost that I remember, I do remember seeing some tips online, but it was mostly about, for this particular mission, just use more Lancers and focus on defeating the tanks first, stuff like that. So the best tips I can give you is, well, first and foremost, it's a very addictive game to me. So I didn't mind trying out different things and getting a game over. It's frustrating, especially when you are almost at the end of a 1 hour long mission. All of a sudden you die and it's back to the fucking beginning. Unless you saved somewhere in between. If you do that, you can restore from the point before you fucked up, right? Which is usually better for the longer missions. Use those saves, that's my first tip. But be careful, don't overwrite your main file. Always use separate save files for when you save in the middle of a mission. And just, if you can, just restart the mission. Valkyria Chronicles is all about trial and error. I mean, it's really hard to strategize because the enemies can be so unpredictable. And because it's a game that relies on RNG, and the RNG can be fucked up sometimes. You can sometimes be pretty close to the enemy, and you start shooting, and they duck, and they dodge your attack. Sometimes even if you attack them from behind, the game tells you to attack the enemies from behind, because there are bigger chances of them not dodging the attack. But sometimes they do, and how is that your fault? There's nothing you can do about that. That's the RNG bullshit right there, man. So it's one of those trial and error. Maybe don't attack that particular soldier the same way, or hope that the motherfucker doesn't dodge your attack, stuff like that. Or sometimes with the snipers, you're pretty sure you're gonna hit their heads and kill them in one shot, and they evade, or you just do very little damage. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is that be patient with that game. It's worth it, but it's all about trial and error, trying to figure out what to do, how to approach the game strategies, which characters to move where, how to use the scouts, each class, stuff like that. You can grind also a little bit if you want to. So yeah, be patient with that game. It's worth it. It's a masterpiece. All the games in the series, even the second one on the PSP, which is the worst in the series, it's still pretty good, by the way. So yeah, I love that series so much, man, that I don't mind losing and rage quitting, because I know for a fact I'm gonna be there 5 minutes later trying to beat the mission and trying out a different strategy. So yeah, just be patient, man. Oh, and don't try to abuse. Well, this is a game. These are games where you can't just break a unit, a specific unit, unless late in the game you start getting like exclusive equipment for some units, specific characters, right? And that makes them a little bit more powerful. But you can't grind these units separately. You only grind the classes. That you level up, the experience you get is shared, amongst the entire class of characters. And so obviously you're not gonna be able to properly break some of the characters or some of the classes. But the best advice I can give you is find the characters that you think are more useful and stick to them, even if you won't be able to grind them specifically. Anyway, those are my tips. Are there any RPGs where you love the gameplay and story but you dislike the art style, the graphics so much it prevented you completing it? No. I've played games where the art style or the graphics were kind of lame or kind of bad, but they did not prevent me from completing it. So no, there isn't a single one of them. But some examples I can provide of RPGs like that. I always thought Vandal Hearts had a really, well, not really, kind of ugly art style, but I still fucking loved it. Others, I've encountered some graphical issues with the games. Grandia 2 on the PS2. It was a mediocre port of the game on the Dreamcast, and it has a lot of lag and slowdown, and it was fucking annoying. I remember in that game I was getting sometimes into encounters that I didn't want to fight, and because of the lag, because you know you move around and all your characters follow you around, follow you behind you, and if one character touches the enemy, you get into a fucking battle, man. And with the lag, it was annoying. I still completed the game on the PS2. East 9 on the Switch had some resolution issues. You know, whenever you were fighting, you know, man, the resolution went down considerably, and it was kind of bad. But still, I completed the game. But in terms of visuals, like everything is ugly, you know. Well, I only have 2 words for that. PlayStation 1. Man, a lot of RPGs in that console looked fucking ugly, but I still completed them. But yeah, you know, I never quit on a game for having ugly art style or graphics. I don't think so.